Okay, so Luxembourg's housing market. Right. Everyone wants to know what's going on over there. We've got these two reports, and one saying Luxembourg might be thinking about doing this whole rent mirror thing, kind of like Germany.
Hmm.
And the other one is saying that renting in Luxembourg, maybe not such a good idea, not so profitable anymore. So is it all going to come crashing down?
Well, let's take a look.
Yeah, let's find out.
I think the rent mirror thing is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's officially it's called Mietspiegel in Germany.
Huge beagle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically it's like this big database,
Okay.
and they look at, how big is the place, where is it, how old is the building, even like is it energy efficient? All that stuff goes into it.
Okay.
And they use that to come up with what rent should be.
Oh, so it's not just landlords being like, yeah, $5,000 a month sounds good.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
There's like data behind it.
Exactly. It makes things a lot more transparent.
Yeah, that's good.
And, renters can see it too.
Oh,
So it kind of takes the guesswork out of it when you're trying to figure out, what's a fair price.
that makes a lot of sense.
In Germany, they've also got this thing called Mietpreisbremse.
Hey, price premise.
Yeah, which means like rent break.
Rent break. Okay.
And they use that rent mirror, the Mietspiegel, as like the reference point.
Right.
And it basically stops landlords from raising rent too much,
Right.
especially in places where everyone wants to live.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want people getting pushed out of their neighborhoods because rent's going crazy.
Exactly.
But how would that even work in Luxembourg? It's so much smaller than Germany.
Yeah, good point.
It's tiny.
And that's why the report thinks that maybe a nationwide approach would be better in Luxembourg.
Oh, okay.
Because, in Germany, it's very local,
Yeah, yeah.
but Luxembourg, it's all kind of connected.
Right.
So having one national system could give you a much better picture of what's happening with rents.
So instead of having like a rent mirror for each little town, it'd be like one big rent mirror for the whole country.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think that would just make things a lot simpler.
I guess, but wouldn't it be a nightmare to like keep track of all that information for the whole country?
It would be a challenge, yeah, for sure. But the report says that the benefits outweigh the costs.
Oh, okay.
Because a good rent register could help, like, settle arguments about rent.
Uh-huh.
And it would give the people making decisions, the government.
Right.
Give them better data so they can make better decisions.
And hopefully maybe that would even keep rents from going crazy.
Yeah, it could help to stabilize the market.
Okay, that's good for renters. But then there's this other report we have that says that being a landlord in Luxembourg might not be such a good deal anymore.
Right.
It's like, is it all doom and gloom for landlords now?
It's not that simple,
Yeah.
but things have definitely changed. See, from like 2018 to 2022,
Yeah.
Luxembourg real estate, it was booming.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. Prices were going up like crazy,
Mm.
sometimes like more than 15% every year.
Wow.
But then around the middle of 2022, interest rates started going up.
And that's usually bad news for real estate, right?
Exactly.
Like a domino effect.
Totally. Higher interest rates mean mortgages are more expensive.
Yeah.
Less people want to buy, and prices start going down.
And this report says that apartment prices went down by almost 16%.
Yeah, between the third quarter of 2022 and the last quarter of 2023.
Wow. So what does that mean for people who rent out their places?
Well, it's had a huge impact on rental yield.
Okay, hold on. For those of us who don't spend all day thinking about real estate,
Right.
what is rental yield? Why should we care?
So rental yield is basically how you figure out if owning a rental property is actually making you money.
Okay.
It's like how much rent you get each year compared to how much the property is worth.
Okay.
Like what's your return on investment as a landlord?
Gotcha. So if I'm getting a lot of rent compared to what I paid for the place, that's a good yield.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But the report, it goes a little deeper, right? It talks about like gross yield and net yield.
Yes.
What's the difference?
It's a really important difference to understand.
Okay.
Gross yield, that's the simple one. It's just your rental income divided by the price of the property. It doesn't take into account any of your expenses.
Oh, so that's like looking at your paycheck before they take out taxes.
Exactly.
Looks good on paper, but it's not what you actually get to keep.
Perfect analogy. The net yield is the real number
Okay.
because it includes all the costs,
Yeah.
like your mortgage payments,
Yeah.
property taxes,
Insurance.
repairs, everything.
Right.
It tells you what you're actually making or not making.
So what are those yields looking like in Luxembourg right now? Is it as bad as the report makes it sound?
Well, the report says that the average gross rental yield in Luxembourg, it stayed pretty stable between 2010 and 2018. It was somewhere between like 4.26% and 4.56%. But then From 2018 to mid-2022, when prices were going up like crazy, the yields started going down.
Because the rent wasn't keeping up with the price.
Right.
Okay.
And it hit a low point, like 3.04% in 2022. Then it went back up a bit in 2023 because prices started falling.
Okay.
But it's still not as high as it was back in, 2010 to 2018.
Right. But you said the net yield is the one that really matters. What's happening with that?
That's where things get a little more interesting.
Oh.
The report says that net rental yields have been really influenced by something they call capital gain expectations.
Okay. Capital gain expectations. What does that even mean?
So basically it means that investors were betting on the fact that the property would be worth more in the future.
Oh, so even if the rent wasn't that high, they were thinking, well, I'll make a ton of money when I sell it later.
Exactly.
Okay, so they were counting on that future profit.
Right. And that expectation, that prices would keep going up. It was a big factor in why people were investing, even if they weren't making a lot from the rent right away.
But what happens when those prices don't go up anymore?
That's the problem. Now that prices are falling, those hopes of making a big profit when they sell, they're gone.
Right.
And the estimated net rental yield for 2024,
Yeah.
they think it's going to be negative.
So not only are they not making much from the rent, but they might actually be losing money when you consider that the property is worth less than it was before.
Exactly.
That's a big difference from those boom years.
It's a completely different situation.
Wow.
And with interest rates going up, other investments are starting to look a lot better, like bonds, for example.
Okay, so on the one hand, we've got this possibility of a rent register that could change how rents are set and controlled. And on the other hand, we've got investors who aren't so sure about putting their money into rental properties anymore because the profits aren't what they used to be.
Right.
It sounds like things are pretty uncertain right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a time of change.
What does all this mean for the future of Luxembourg's housing market?
It's a really interesting question. I think to understand how things might play out, we need to, look more closely at this rent mirror idea.
Yeah.
And see what's happened in other places where they've tried similar things.
Right, because maybe there are some lessons to be learned from those experiences.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's do that. I'm curious to hear what we can learn from those examples and how they might apply to Luxembourg. All right, so we're back and ready to, really get into this whole rent mirror thing.
Okay.
Sounds good in theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
More transparency, a little less guesswork.
Yeah.
But is it really like a magic solution?
Well, I don't think there's any perfect solutions, especially when we're talking about something as complicated as housing.
Right.
And Germany, like we said, they've had this rent register, and some rent control measures for a while now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a mixed bag, honestly.
Oh, really? So it's not like a dream come true for renters?
Not exactly. Some people say it's helped keep rents stable, and stop those crazy rent hikes.
Yeah.
But then others say that it's actually made it harder to build new rental properties.
Oh, so there could be fewer places to rent.
Yeah, exactly, in some areas.
So it's not just about, keeping rents low. It's also about making sure that there are enough places for people to live.
Exactly.
It's like finding that balance.
It is.
And, this whole rent register thing,
Yeah.
wouldn't that mean a lot more paperwork for landlords?
Yeah, potentially.
And if it's a pain for them, maybe they won't want to rent out their places anymore.
That's a valid concern. That's one of the arguments against rent control,
Okay.
that it makes landlords less likely to want to, fix things up or make their places nicer.
Oh, because they can't raise the rent to make up for the money they spend.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not a win for renters either if you end up living in a place that's falling apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can lead to a decline in the overall quality of rental housing.
Right.
So it's really about finding that sweet spot, that balance,
Yeah. Where you're protecting tenants, but you're not making it impossible for landlords to provide good housing.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like Luxembourg might want to learn from what's happened in Germany and try to avoid some of those problems.
Definitely.
What other challenges are there? What else should they be thinking about?
Well, one of the biggest criticisms of the way they do in Germany is all the bureaucracy.
All right.
Getting all that data from the entire country and putting it together and making sense of it. That's a huge job.
Right.
And then there's always a chance that some of the information is wrong or maybe it's biased in some way.
Oh, so even if everyone's trying to be fair, it might be really hard to create a system that's completely accurate.
Yeah, and even with the best intentions, there can be unintended consequences. Well, some people argue that rent control actually makes rents go up in the long run.
Wait, how does that even work?
Because if landlords feel like you're not making enough money, they might just decide to sell their properties.
Oh, so then there are fewer places to rent, and the prices go up because of that.
Exactly.
So it's like you're trying to help, but you end up making things worse.
Right. It can be really tricky.
It sounds like there's no easy solution. Anything you do can have all these ripple effects.
Yeah.
And it's hard to predict what's going to happen.
That's why it's so important to have a really good discussion about it,
Yeah,
Involve everyone who might be affected.
right. And think about the long term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about a quick fix. It's about creating something that's going to work for everyone in the long run.
Okay, so let's bring it back to our listeners for a second.
Okay.
If I'm thinking about moving to Luxembourg or maybe buying a place there to rent out, what should I be thinking about after this conversation?
Well, it's definitely more complicated than it was a few years ago.
Right.
If you're looking to rent this rent register thing, it could be good news
Okay.
because it could make rents more predictable,
Yeah.
but it's also possible that it'll be harder to find a place to rent.
Oh, so it's not a sure thing.
No.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about investing in real estate in Luxembourg, you really have to think about the fact that it's not as profitable as it used to be.
Right, because those yields are down.
Exactly.
So maybe it's better to put your money somewhere else.
It might be worth looking at other options, yeah. Especially with interest rates going up, bonds are starting to look pretty good.
Yeah, that's true.
But, real estate can still be a good investment in the long term.
Right.
It's just really important to do your research.
Yeah, understand what's going on. Don't just jump in without thinking about it.
Absolutely.
So the message here is be careful.
Yeah.
Do your homework. Don't make any decisions based on, what you heard from someone's cousin's friend.
Right, exactly.
This is not the time to be, gambling with your money.
It's a time to be cautious. We're in a period of transition. Things are changing.
Right.
And to make good decisions, you need to really understand what's happening.
Okay, so we've talked about the rent register, the pros and cons, the problems with putting it into practice and how it's not so profitable to be a landlord anymore.
Yeah.
What else should our listeners be thinking about as they, try to figure all this out?
Well, it's important to remember that housing markets, they're not just affected by, the government and investors.
Right.
There's all sorts of things that play a role. Like how many people live in a place? Is the economy growing?
Yeah.
Interest rates, obviously.
Yeah.
Even cultural things.
Right, like what people want in a home.
Exactly.
It's like this giant puzzle and all the pieces are connected.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And the pieces are always moving around.
Exactly. And that's why you have to look at the whole picture.
Right. So bringing it back to today's deep dive, what are the main things we learned about Luxembourg's housing market?
I think the biggest takeaway is that things are changing.
Yeah.
The market's adjusting, profits are down, and there might be new rules coming.
Right.
It's a really dynamic situation. And what the government does and what investors do over the next few years,
Yeah.
that's going to have a huge impact on what happens with housing in Luxembourg.
It sounds like we're at a turning point.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The decisions that get made now, they're going to have effects for a long time.
So what do you think is going to happen? Any predictions?
If I could predict the future, I'd be doing something else.
I bet.
But seriously, I think there are a few things to watch.
Okay. Right.
What's the government going to do about this rent register?
Yeah.
Are they going to copy Germany or do something different?
That's a big decision.
It is. And then how are investors going to react to the fact that it's harder to make money from rentals now? Are they going to pull out of the market? Or are they going to find new ways to make it work?
It seems like there are more questions than answers right now.
Yeah, there are a lot of unknowns.
But that's kind of what makes it so interesting, right?
It is.
It's all happening in real time.
Exactly.
So how can our listeners stay on top of things?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed.
Okay, so pay attention to the news, read articles about the housing market,
Yeah.
talk to experts.
Yeah, and talk to other people who are involved in the market.
The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
Exactly.
Whether you're renting or investing or just interested in what's going on.
Absolutely.
Great advice. And remember, folks, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as complicated as the housing market in Luxembourg.
Yeah.
So stay curious, keep learning, and we'll be right back after a quick break to wrap up our deep dive. All right, we're back. And Wow, this deep dive into Luxembourg's housing market has been, well, a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. It's complicated.
Right. It really shows you how, like, everything's connected.
Yeah, for sure.
Interest rates and what investors are doing and the government and, people just needing a place to live.
All tied together.
Yeah, it's like trying to keep all those plates spinning in the air at the circus.
I know what you
You
mean.
make one wrong move and the whole thing crashes down.
And the thing is, the rules of the game keep changing.
Exactly. So we talked about a lot, right, this rent register thing and how, like, finding the right balance is so tricky. And then, of course, how it might not be such a good deal to be a landlord in Luxembourg anymore.
Right. It's a lot to take in.
It is. So what's the one big question you want our listeners to walk away with, something to really think about?
How about this? If they do this rent register thing, how's that going to change who has more power?
You mean like between landlords and renters?
Yeah. Will it give renters more say in what happens with their rent?
Oh, okay.
Or is it just going to create, more bureaucracy and headaches for everyone?
That's a really good question. Because it gets to the heart of, like, who wins and who loses with these kinds of policies.
Exactly. And there are no easy answers. It's something that people in Luxembourg need to talk about, really think about.
Yeah, definitely. And this whole conversation really shows why it's so important to stay informed, stay involved, whether you're a renter or a landlord or an investor or just someone who cares about housing.
Absolutely.
It's easy to just read the headlines and get swept up in the excitement or the fear, but you got to understand the issues.
For sure.
And, listen to different perspectives.
Yeah.
That's how you make good decisions.
That's right.
Well, I want to thank you so much for walking us through all this. It's been fascinating.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
And to all of our listeners, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Luxembourg's housing market. We hope you learned something. And remember, stay curious, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.